Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. More Albertans have been placed on evacuation orders as the number of wildfires have increased in our province. Lethbridge provincial election candidates came out to the NMAC Centre on Tuesday night expressing some concerns. And in part 2 of our feature on the Kootenai Brown Pioneer Village, we're introduced to a royal exhibit.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Wildfires continue in a number of regions in both central and northern Alberta. Fire officials say there are currently 91 fires burning in the province, with 27 of them being out of control. More than 19,000 Albertans have been evacuated, with thousands more remaining under an evacuation order. 13 reception centres have also been set up assisting evacuees.
In the past 24 hours, there have been changes to evacuation orders and alerts. The total number of evacuation orders now stands at 21. In particular, an evacuation order is now in place for the town of Swan Hills. Residents of that community should go to the reception centre in Barrhead and pay close attention to details in the emergency alert. All residents who are evacuating should register at the nearest reception centre or online. So far, more than 15,918 people are registered. Registering makes it easier to get help and resources to evacuees, and it makes it easier for officials to reach residents with important updates and information.
The wildfire situation continues in parts of British Columbia as well. The BC Wildfire Service has 400 fire personnel, along with 22 helicopters, were battling blazes around Fort St. John. The city of around 21,000 people in northeastern British Columbia remains on evacuation alert, with flames around 20 kilometers away. Fire officials say parts of the province are in the middle of their core fire season, which is months ahead of schedule. Wildfire smoke could be seen in southern and central Saskatchewan as well. Officials with Environment Canada say particulate matter in the air from the smoke is so high in certain areas that it is simply off the charts. They say wildfire smoke is hazardous to people's health, especially those who are more vulnerable, including those with asthma or lung disease. The air quality was so bad that the Saskatchewan Roughriders moved their training camp indoors. The symptoms that come along with being in the midst of wildfire smoke can vary from person to person. That's according to the Medical Officer of Health for Alberta Health Services South Zone. Dr. Vivian Suttorp says some are more sensitive, while others are simply more vulnerable.
For most individuals, like sitting by a smoky campfire, people can get irritated eyes, nose, throat. You end up producing more mucus. Your system produces more mucus to protect you from the irritants of the smoke and the particulate matter. Some individuals may sneeze, some may have coughing. Individuals with underlying lung conditions or heart conditions, lung conditions such as asthma or COPD, may end up having more coughing and may experience some symptoms of shortness of breath.
You know, the wildfire smoke in Lethbridge took many people by surprise. Environment Canada issued a special air quality statement with a 7 or high risk rating today. According to one Lethbridge pharmacist, the poor air quality also caused people from both Alberta and British Columbia with respiratory issues to purchase a number of inhalers.
As soon as the smoke got in, we got increased demand of Ventolin, the rescue inhalers, among asthma and COPD patients. And just alone yesterday, like our usual go-through for the Ventolin inhaler is like 5 to 6 a day. And yesterday, we went through over 20 inhalers. So we just increased our, the storage capacity for the Ventolin inhaler. And the good thing in Alberta, though, like with presence of the prescribing authority for pharmacists, we have an advantage come over to BC that we can like give out the Ventolin inhaler to patients.
Suki Diaz says that BC patients would normally have to go see a doctor to get a prescription for that inhaler. You know, and speaking of those smoky conditions, Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, will the winds or maybe even some rain help improve the air quality somewhat?
Well, you know, Hal, a 20K wind from the northwest is all we're expecting this evening, so it isn't going to help a whole lot. Now, we were supposed to have clearer skies today, but that's not been the case. Instead, we were seeing that widespread smoke. So our air quality index was sitting at 5 today, which is considered a moderate risk. Now, keep in mind that air quality can fluctuate considerably from hour to hour. And this evening, we're expecting local smoke in those localized concentrated areas and an overnight low of 4. So Thursday, the forecast calls for sunshine along with haziness. However, we'll have to see if that actually happens. But with a high of 23, we're also expected to see temperatures get warmer and warmer as we get into the weekend. But showers not expected until next week. I'll be back later in the show to give you a full look at the national forecast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The Alberta election is just around the corner now. The Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition will be fielding some candidates. Now, their party leader is the former head of the Wild Rose Independence Party, Paul Hinman. Hinman says when it comes to the Alberta wildfires, an investigation needs to be launched to determine what caused so many of them.
It seems like government is being more nefarious and fear-mongering over ridiculous things like the CO2 causing these things versus is it human started? Like they should be out there doing the research to find out, are 7 out of 10 these, how are they started? Are they human started? Is it accidentally campers, or is it actually nefarious? And that should be top news, that letting Albertans know what the cause of this is.
Make sure you catch the full interview with the leader of the Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition, Paul Hinman, and myself. That's coming up in the second half of our program. Around 150 people came out to the NMAC Centre on Tuesday night to hear from some of the Lethbridge provincial election candidates. The media and audience members had a chance to ask the candidates various questions. A number of hot-button topics were discussed, including healthcare, education, and the economy. UCP Lethbridge East candidate Nathan Neudorf also talked about his government's plan enforcing violent offenders into drug rehab.
We are going to support our police services by allowing them through the court system with a judge's order to direct those individuals to mandatory treatment. We are here to make sure that the safety of our community is first and foremost, and we're tired of being victims in our own communities. We want to make sure that we not only fund our police officers, but we support them with laws that allow the court system to do what the NDP didn't do the last time, creating chaos in the downtown, but by allowing those violent offenders to get the treatment they need, whether or not they always want to.
The Lethbridge West candidates also discussed a number of topics, including private education. The NDP candidate, Shannon Phillips, says if her party forms government on May 29th, they would continue to support private schools.
Charter schools receive about 70% of the per student operating grants that is received from public schools, which is of course our public Catholic and Francophone schools. This has not changed. This was an approach that we inherited from the Progressive Conservative government before us. We did not change it. It has not changed since that time. So we've indicated that there will be no change going forward. And that's the answer to that question. We will fund enrollment growth wherever it occurs.
Now, many of the candidates were also asked if they supported a new permanent supervised consumption site for our city. Many said they would not support it, including the UCP's Nathan Neudorf and Cheryl Seaborn. The NDP's Shannon Phillips also said no to an SCS, and NDP Lethbridge East candidate Rob Miyashiro, after being asked a few times, said, quote, "At this point, no." The Alberta provincial election is coming up on May the 29th. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is not happy with the Alberta NDP. They say the party's plan of hiking our province's general business tax rate from 8 to 11% would be a job-killing initiative. Now, to talk about this in more detail is the Alberta director of the CTF, Chris Sims, who joins us right here in Lethbridge. Chris, essentially you are giving Rachel Notley and the NDP a failing grade?
Yeah, for sure. Because on the one hand, they're doing the right thing by saying they're going to take the small business tax down to 0. But then they're turning around and saying, if you get really big and successful and you start employing people, we're going to nail you with a higher business tax rate. So they're proposing to hike the business tax rate here in Alberta from 8% up to 11%. You know how folks are flocking here, and this will act as a scarecrow for people. It will drive away entrepreneurs and investment.
Now, Chris, an increase of 3% would add around $1.6 billion to provincial coffers. Wouldn't that be a good thing to help support things like infrastructure and other revenues which may be needed?
The math actually doesn't work out that way. If you take a look at how much money they were taking in between a higher or a lower corporate tax rate, they're actually taking in more revenue with a lower corporate tax rate. So right now we're at 8%. The provincial government is on track to take in more than $6 billion in that corporate tax. But back when it was up at 12%, they were only taking in just over $4 billion. So it seems counterintuitive, but the lower rate actually pulls in more revenue because you have more people setting up shop here.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was Chris Sims, Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining us from Lethbridge. You know, things got a little bit heated during question period on Parliament Hill. Ontario Conservative MP Melissa Lantsman blasted Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, saying her government needs to do more to help Canadians who are struggling financially.
Canadians are seeing even higher inflation today. Now we know for sure, again, that Liberal deficits drive Liberal inflation. And the Finance Minister's last budget is driving every Canadian household $4,200 more into debt. Where is the accountability? Where are her answers? And why does she talk to Canadians like they're in kindergarten? The effect of her own failures is playing out right in front of her very eyes. Does she not see what everybody else sees?
The people who talk to Canadians as if they're in kindergarten are the Conservatives. The Conservatives behave as if Canadians do not understand that the judge of Canada's fiscal responsibility is not overheated Conservative rhetoric. The judge is the ratings agencies.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke in South Korea shortly after signing memorandums of understanding with the Asian nation. Trudeau says the goal for this trip was to increase cooperation on supply chains for critical minerals and youth mobility. The joint effort to strengthen economic and cultural ties comes as both countries aim to reduce their dependence on China.
Today, we're announcing a new youth mobility arrangement, which will result in more work and travel opportunities for young people in Canada and Korea. This will help young Canadians and Koreans acquire international experience while strengthening the ties between our people. Another thing we share is our desire to build a cleaner and more prosperous future for our countries. It's never been clearer that economic growth, climate action, and security and stability are all interrelated.
Negotiations continued between WestJet and the Airline Pilots Association. The union has issued strike notice to walk off the job on Friday, while the airline has issued lockout notice to its employees. The pilots are fighting for, among other things, better pay. Now, in a statement to Bridge City News, Union Chair Captain Bernard Lewell had this to say: "Negotiations are ongoing. We recognize flight disruptions are never an ideal outcome in this process for our pilots or passengers. That's why our negotiators are making themselves available 24/7 until the end of the 72-hour notice period to reach a negotiated agreement that will help fix WestJet pilots' attraction and retention crisis and allow the airline to recognize its growth strategy. If negotiations are not met by 3 a.m. Friday morning, pilots could immediately begin striking just prior to the Victoria Day long weekend." Police in Milk River were called out to an incident at the Canadian Port of Entry in Coots. RCMP say 2 officers with the Canadian Border Services Agency suffered minor injuries when they were hit by a motor vehicle last Saturday. The male driver was taken into custody by the border officers until RCMP arrived. 50-year-old Milk River resident Cash Miller faces charges including assaulting a peace officer, dangerous operation of a vehicle, and obstructing a peace officer. Miller was released and will be in Lethbridge Court on June the 12th. 3 police agencies are set to host a law enforcement career day on May 19th at the Lethbridge College Gym. The Lethbridge Police Service, Blood Tribe Police Service, and the RCMP are all participating. The day is open to the public and will provide information about each agency and the process in becoming a police officer. Staff from the LPS told us they're looking forward to hiring up to 12 potential new officers by November of 2023 and are ready to hit the streets by 2024. Allison Williams, a constable with the LPS recruiting unit, highlighted what the event is going to look like.
This Friday, May 19th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., we have all 3 gymnasiums at the college. booked. We are going to set up a prep orientation, so one of the gyms will actually have the full prep set up so that anybody who is interested in just getting familiar with the machines can come. We can even run them through a couple rounds of it. And then the second gymnasium is going to have two of our TAC members along with a K9 that are going to do some fun demos so that people can kind of see what things are like through those units. And then the third gymnasium is going to have all of the recruiting booths and the recruiting officers there so that if anybody is interested in a career in policing, they can come chat with the different agencies, see what we all have to offer, and we will have our recruiters there to chat with them about the application process, the hiring process, the recruit process, and any questions that they might have.
Officials say the Lethbridge Police Service, Blood Tribe Police, and the RCMP are all currently hiring. Several events and initiatives will make Lethbridge's downtown a very busy place this year, thanks to $120,000 in funding. The Reimagined Downtown Activation Grant originated back in 2021 through the Heart of Our City Committee. Now, the funding aims to support businesses, entrepreneurs, and community-minded individuals in implementing events or programs to activate vacant or underutilized public and private spaces in the downtown core. This year, more than 20 events and initiatives received grants of up to $10,000. They include the Word on the Street Festival, Shakespeare in the Park, Oktoberfest YQL, and the very popular Foodie Fest. You know, the Royals have been a huge topic of conversation as of late with the recent coronation of King Charles and Queen Camilla on May the 6th. Now, part two of our story on the Kootenai Brown Pioneer Village, video journalist Micah Quinn caught up with the staff who talked about the vast collection from the Royals exhibit that pays tribute to a very special collector who passed away from a terrible disease.
Tracy lost her life to cancer here just a few years ago, so Pauline and Derek have dedicated this collection to come to Kootenai Brown Pioneer Village.
The memory of Tracy Breeze Jenkins lives on in the Royals exhibit at the Kootenai Brown Pioneer Village. Tracy's parents, Pauline and Derek Breeze, have been instrumental in the growth of the village for around 20 years, along with providing memorabilia in the past for the Royals exhibit with their daughter.
Longtime Pincher Creek residents since their own immigration from England in 1953. Their daughter, Tracy Breeze Jenkins, was very eager and very interested in the royal family and such, and as part of her own heritage. And she collected a great array of dishes and pottery and things like that that had commemoration to various members of the royal family in the 1900s right on up until King Charles' coronation.
The Royals display is currently located in Pioneer Place in the village, with a plan to bring it to a permanent spot in the future. When you take a look through the village, the Royals exhibit isn't the only one with a strong history. The Hudson's Bay Company Stores building showcases Indigenous stories as well.
That brings into not only the history of the fur trade and the Hudson's Bay Company's role in the shaping of what Canada looks like today, but also speaks to our First Nations element. The Métis First Nations, our Piikani neighbors, and the whole Niitsitapi Blackfoot as a whole, and how the First Nations are really the example of what has come to be Southwest Alberta as we know it.
Staff from the village told us that historic items are accepted on a donation basis according to the organization's collections policy. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Looking forward to checking out that Pioneer Village in Pincher Creek. Wow. Well, it was another smoky one across parts of southwestern Alberta again today. The good news is the smoke should start to clear up a little. Full weather details are coming up. The wildfire smoke continues not only here in Alberta, but also in British Columbia and Saskatchewan as well. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, some of that wildfire smoke has settled into our region, but hopefully it'll be clearing out soon?
Well, Hal, time will tell because we're not expecting much rain until as we get into Sunday night and Monday. But until then, fairly dry conditions and getting warmer as well as we get into the weekend. High of 23 is expected on Thursday. Looking at a forecast of sunshine, but we will see with that widespread smoke. There's supposed to be localized smoke as well this evening. By Friday, high of 29 degrees with clear skies, hopefully. Here's hoping. 27 for a high on Saturday and high of 28 degrees expected on Sunday. Sunday evening, though, that's when we could see that 30% chance of showers, 60% chance expected on Monday. Hopefully that will clear away all the smoke. 23 is expected for Monday and a high of 22 on Tuesday with a mix of sun and cloud. And hopefully by then those wildfires will be well under control. Average high for this time of year, 18. Average low, 4 degrees. 31, that was our high temperature on this day. That happened back in 2006. And the cold record was -3. And that happened in 1955 on this day. Sun rose this morning at 5:44. Sunset this evening at 9:12, giving us 15 hours and 28 minutes of daylight. It's going to be a sunny one on the coast tomorrow. Look at that on the island. High of 27 with lots of sunshine. Very high humidex as well expected there, about 31. 24 for a high in Vancouver. As you get further inland, we're looking at even warmer conditions and high humidex as well. Lots of sunshine. 22 for a high expected tomorrow in both Edmonton and Calgary with clear skies. However, the air quality index was sitting at moderate today in Edmonton, and Calgary was off the charts. So we're looking at 10 plus, which gives you a very high risk. Into Saskatchewan, extreme particle matter concentrations and an air quality index of 10 plus are still at a risk of occurring there. A band of thick smoke continued to linger over much of the southern and central part of the province. In the southeast, though, gradual improvement is expected. However, southwestern and west central areas of the province will remain downwind of large fires in northern Saskatchewan into Thursday and Friday at minimum. Now, Saskatoon and Regina both were sitting at moderate risk today, and both of those cities are expected to see sunny and hazy conditions on Thursday. High of 18 in Saskatoon, 16 for a high in Regina, 11 for a high tomorrow in Winnipeg. Winnipeg also looking at a 30%, actually 60% chance of showers tomorrow. And here's what's happening in Manitoba with a cold front sweeping through that province. So they could see plenty of smoke there as well. So hopefully that rain in Winnipeg will clear that away. 16 for a high in Toronto tomorrow, 18 for a high in Ottawa, high of 15 expected in Montreal. Clear skies all the way around in central Canada. As we look to the Maritimes, there are some areas that are still seeing that precipitation, but Fredericton mainly clear skies, 14 for a high there. Halifax, high of 11 tomorrow. Frost advisory in effect this evening for both Halifax and Charlottetown. That could really affect their crops in those frost-prone areas. Charlottetown, though, looking at wet flurries expected tomorrow, along with showers, high of 11 degrees. 9 expected for a high in St. John's, Newfoundland, and they could see 40% chance of showers along with some drizzle. There you have it. That is your forecast.
Company officials with WestJet say a massive gap remains in place between the pilots' union and the airline as a Friday strike deadline looms. They say negotiations continue, however, with the 1,800 pilots who could potentially walk off the job. A strike would not only impact WestJet, but also the carrier's low-cost subsidiary, Swoop. Air Canada signed a new partnership agreement with Fly Dubai. The deal would offer travelers more options when heading to the Middle East, East Africa, the Indian subcontinent, and Southern Asia. Officials say an Air Canada marketing code will be placed on 9 Fly Dubai routes. They say it would give travelers the opportunity to travel to those regions on just a single ticket. Officials say the partnership complements the airline's nonstop service to Dubai from both Vancouver and Toronto. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 54 points on the day to finish at 20,296. The Dow was up 408 points to 33,420. The S&P 500 was up 48 on the day to 4158. And the NASDAQ was also up on the day 157 points to 12,500. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.74 to $72.60 US per barrel. Natural gas was even on the day at $2.38 US. Gold was up 4 cents to $19.8188 US an ounce, and silver was down a cent to $23.74 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.10 per bushel, barley's at $8.86, canola's at $16.08, and corn is at $9.85 per bushel. Live cattle June contract was up 95 cents to $164.83. Feeder cattle were down $1.15 to $204.55, and lean hogs were down 233 to 84.88. That's for the June contract. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 74.32 US. Recapping one of our top stories, wildfires continue in a number of regions of both central and northern Alberta. Fire officials say there are currently 91 fires burning in the province, with 27 of them out of control. More than 19,000 Albertans have been evacuated, with thousands more remaining under an evacuation order. 13 reception centers have also been set up, assisting evacuees. You know, there's an Alberta party seeking your votes on May 29th that has a bit of a different twist, different agenda. They're a party who wants Alberta to become a sovereign nation. Watch the interview with the leader of the Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition, Paul Hinman, and myself, coming up in just a few moments. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you. The Alberta provincial election is just around the corner, coming up on May the 29th. And our guest today is Paul Hinman, the leader of the Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition and the candidate for Taber-Warner. Paul, welcome back to Bridge City News.
It's great to be here, Hal, and thanks for having us on again.
You bet. You know, a number of our viewers have probably never even heard of the Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition. How would you best describe your party?
Well, the Wild Rose actually started back in January of 2008 when we merged a few other ones, and we've had different, what would I say, because of the merges, and again, I want to say the betrayal of our leaders that continue to cross the floor, put on dancing shoes and getting married and want to burn the party down. We've had to re-register for this election as a Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition. This is the Wild Rose continuing on, realizing that, you know, each election is getting more serious, and this one, to me, Al, is the most important election in our lifetime. The reason why I say that is because we have a prime minister and a federal government who wants to shut down our oil and gas industry. They want the farmers, especially in Taber-Warner, to reduce their fertilizer by 30%. They want to shut down our beef industry. And this is wrong. It's not good for Alberta. It's not good for the world. And we in rural Alberta need to send a message to say no to this carbon net zero in this chase for this net zero. It's not good. The world needs more. We have the most ethical food and oil production in the world, and this is where the world is targeted, want to shut it down. This is nefarious, and that's why the Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition has sprung back up again, kind of like Wild Rose roots. You can cut it down, but we're going to keep popping back up, fighting for freedom and fighting for the people here.
Now, some people say it's more important to build bridges with Ottawa and the Trudeau Liberals instead of burning the bridges. How would you respond to that?
When you're in a broken, dysfunctional relationship that's becoming more and more toxic, you need to stand up for yourself. For example, if you've got a partner who's addicted to drugs and gambling and blowing all of your money, you need to get your own bank account. You can't have them making the decisions and signing mortgages or who knows what they're going to do. Ottawa is broken. Their debt is out of control. Their policies are ridiculous. And we need to stand up and have full autonomy. And that's what the Wild Rose is about, is a mandate from the people to exercise our full autonomy and say, you know what, if you don't get your act together, we're leaving. And we just have to stand up. And again, carbon net zero to me really is what this election is about. That everyone else is saying, oh, we need to go along to get along. Oh, it's good. It isn't. This is nefarious. And it needs to start in Taber-Warner, where we have, I want to say, the breadbasket of Alberta, the vegetables, the food that's growing here, the fertilizer that's needed, the energy that's needed. You know, even at the sugar factory, there's a lot of energy that produces the wonderful food that we have. And the federal government, well, the really sad thing is that both Rachel Notley and Danielle Smith agree with carbon net zero. They only argue on how fast to do it. And the answer is no. No to the Paris Accord, no to carbon net zero. No to Ottawa. We'll exercise our own decisions.
Now, it seems like you take a little bit of issue as well with the current provincial government and UCP leader Danielle Smith when it comes to the wildfires. Can you explain?
Well, what really frustrates me and what's important is information. And it seems like government is being more nefarious and fear-mongering over ridiculous things like the CO2 causing these things versus is it human started? Like they should be out there doing the research to find out, you know, are 7 out of 10 these, how are they started? Are they human human started? Is it accidentally campers, or is it actually nefarious? And that should be top news, that letting Albertans know what the cause of this is. And the government needs to do a better job in all aspects, on whether it's reporting the health, whether it's, the reporting the condition of the skies. But that's important information that I believe Albertans have a right to know, and the duty of government to put out that good information.
So, Paul, it wasn't long ago that you were the leader of the Wildrose Independence Party. What happened there?
We had nefarious individuals on the inside that basically burned the party down. Obviously, we were a threat, and a good threat to the provincial government. And for whatever reasons, we had moles and nefarious individuals that got in positions and basically shut down the party, and they're holding it, with, I want to say, kind of like a closed book. And they've run 2 candidates to be able to keep the name, to stop us from going forward. So we had to start a new party.
Now, is the Wildrose Loyalty Coalition a separatist party or sovereigntist party?
We're absolutely about sovereignty, but first and foremost, in any divorce, the first thing you need to do is exercise your full autonomy, and that's what we're asking Albertans for, is that mandate, to have our own police force, to have our own environmental laws and regulations. But probably the most important thing that we need is the mandate from the people to collect the taxes. We're sending $65 billion down to Ottawa, and they like to do such things as shut down our oil and gas, put punitive taxes on of $65 a ton for carbon, making a hardship for every person in Canada. But there's no upside to it, but a huge downside. And we just can't have that. And we need to collect the taxes here in Alberta and get control of the piggy bank. $13 billion to who? Volkswagen? For what? Electric car batteries? Unbelievable.
So what would be your plan in regards to supporting our farmers and as well our oil and gas sectors? How would you get our product to Tidewater as a sovereign nation?
Well, excellent. And we'd actually have leverage. And again, if we were to become, and I would love to see Northern BC and Saskatchewan come on with us, but someone has to lead. But you actually have, I want to say, leverage. Right now, we have no leverage in Confederation. They get to dictate, and our Constitution allows for a divide and conquer. And if 8 of them say that we can't ship our oil out, they get to stop us, despite the fact that the Constitution says we have a right to that. But as a sovereign nation, we could say, well, we understand that. In the port of Vancouver, which is the biggest in Canada, nothing is coming through Alberta without an excise tax going on it, or we might even put some holds or things on it. We need to be able to argue, and we could, but probably the more important thing, Hal, is that there's been a group for years, the Eagle Spirit Energy Corridor, that has wanted to put in a pipeline. Actually, they've been so bold as to want 4 pipelines to Prince Rupert. The Indigenous people have signed on, but they've finally given up after Jason Kenney got in and dropped them flat on their face. They've moved on to other things, but I believe that we could actually make a deal with the Indigenous people and get this done in short order.
How about supporting a lot of our farmers? You live in a strong farming community where you are in Tabor-Warner.
Our number one thing is to eliminate all taxes on hydrocarbons, on food, and we believe we could eliminate property taxes and be looking at an excise export tax. We just absolutely need to eliminate the tax on hydrocarbons. That's probably the most important base thing that everybody needs, whether it's for heating their homes, whether it's for their industry. It's just critical. And to put a tax on that is a domino effect that's causing one of the major causes of inflation. Everything from trucking food to putting it in to producing our fertilizer, all of those things is basic costs and has a domino effect. So if we were to actually produce and have more oil and gas, to have more fertilizer here in the province and producing those things, prices would go down and productivity would go up.
Now, Paul, you're running in the Tabor-Warner riding, which you actually won back in 2004 with a narrow upset win over the Progressive Conservative candidate. But right now, today in 2023, what are you hearing from the people in your riding? What are some of the biggest issues right now?
Well, the biggest issue I would say is inflation. People are very concerned at making ends meet. Housing costs are out of control. We're lucky here; it's not as bad as the cities and other areas. But and healthcare, the access is just unacceptable. And I met one individual. I met 2 in the last 2 weeks of individuals that have gone to Germany for back operations, Germany offered to come and educate and to teach us their techniques, and it was turned down by the provincial government. But those are probably the big issue. But like I say, the real issue, and what I want to say, the ballot question that you should be asking when you go to, there's two questions you should be asking. Number one, are they rejecting carbon net zero? And if they're not, we can't afford to vote for that. And number two, if any politician or political party who says trust me, but they don't trust you with recall, isn't worth the vote that they should get. Don't waste your vote on someone who says trust me. What they should be saying is that we trust you with recall, 50% plus one. And I'd invite people to go to our website, wildroseloyaltycoalition.com, and download the 50% plus one recall pledge, because that's what you should be going to your candidate. Doesn't matter left or right. This idea that these individuals get in and then impose their ideas and their agenda for the next 4 years is unacceptable, or 18 months. And we need a pledge from these different individuals to say that, you know what, if I'm out of step, you can recall me with 50% plus one signatures. It's just so critical. If we want good government, we have to have true accountability.
Let's talk a bit more about healthcare for a moment here. A lot of ridings, a lot of constituencies across the province have a real shortage of healthcare professionals, especially family physicians. What would you do to address that issue?
First thing, we would eliminate the regional the centralized government and go back to what we call actual chief operating officers of each hospital. We would get rid of the global funding. We'd fund services. If you're doing heart surgery, we'd have actuaries that look and say, this is how much we're paying for this. This is how much for MRI. This is how much for an X-ray, and actually have like a business and know what the costs are. And then we would provide that. And again, a lot of these doctors that want to exercise the full scope would be able to get paid for the services they provide. At places like Lethbridge and Tabor hospitals, we could bring in more equipment. We could start performing lots more operations and things because we have the facilities, we just don't have the money. And again, it's backwards. With this global funding, hospital administrator gets it, and then he sees every doctor, every nurse, every patient, every maintenance worker as an expense pulling out. They're not paid for that. They're paid just because of the number of beds and what services they provide. And it's backwards, Hal, and it's inefficient. And if we switch that to having hospital administrators that decide what we're going to get here in this hospital and what our community needs, and they get paid for those services, all of a sudden, you know what? We're going to run that operating room 24/7. We're going to run the MRI 24/7 because we're getting paid. But more important, the need is there.
Now, Paul, you believe that parents should have the right to make decisions for their kids. I assume a big part of this relates to our education system here in Alberta?
Parental rights are paramount, and the family and the protection of the family is critical if we're going to have a functioning society going forward. And to say that whether it's school teachers or any organization that they're claiming to want to care and protect the children and they're superseding parental rights, that is bad for society. Parental rights need to be paramount, needs to be in the Constitution, needs to be protected. They're the ones that have the best interest of their child. Are we perfect as parents? Nope, but we're a lot better than a daycare or a school or some social worker with the government that spends 15 minutes and looks at something and says, oh, this doesn't work or that doesn't work, or even the judges. I've been appalled at some of the decisions that I've seen in the courts, watching as people were trying to do the best they could for their children. But no, parental rights, paramount.
Let's stick with education for just a moment here, Paul. Some teachers I've spoken with say that the ratio is too high, too many students per teacher. What would you like to see for a student-teacher ratio? 20-1, 30-1, 25, somewhere in the middle? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, Hal, it starts on which grade. When you're down in kindergarten through grade 6, you actually need smaller numbers. When it's getting up bigger classes, you look at university, up at the U of A, I was in some classes with, 2,000 students in them. And so it reflects that way. But the bottom line, we don't have enough teachers. We need more teachers. We need to reduce that the student to ratio number for teachers. And we can do that, especially if we're collecting the taxes here in Alberta for Albertans. This idea of sending money to Ottawa and then our handout, looking for infrastructure, looking for healthcare transfers, looking for policing money is wrong. And we are collecting billions of dollars here in the province. Problem is, it's being sucked out to Ottawa. We need to stand up and say, no, you guys can waste other people's money, but not Alberta taxpayers.
Paul, the Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition believes in a free market economy. How would this really differ from the approach of the main parties?
Well, let's even start with carbon net zero and all the nefarious things that government is doing. $13 billion to a battery company. How many of these windmill and solar panel companies are they doing? I mean, they were giving us money to put in a light bulb. They're taking out. They're saying that we can't use straws. Government's intruding in the free market at never seen levels before, in our opinion. And all of that corporate welfare needs to be eliminated. But what you need is low taxes and strong competition between businesses or new ideas. And again, to get businesses started, like all of the red tape and the taxes, and it's crazy. There is no free market. Well, the free market is very limited. You can't say there isn't no free market, but the ability to compete is not here. Again, the regulations on where they say, oh, you need to do all of these things before you can get in, and this requirement or being bonded. What we actually need is a judicial system that people can access and hold people accountable. But because our legal system fails, government steps in with rules and regulations, but they don't hold any water. We need to have a free market and a judicial system where people are held accountable for doing nefarious things and hurting other people of other people's business.
Now, we only have a few short moments left here, Paul, but I wanted to ask you, when it comes to provincial taxes, you want to make some pretty major changes. What are some of those changes?
Well, the biggest thing is, and just realize that municipally, the municipal government collects our property taxes, and on that property tax, there's an education tax. That education tax then goes to the province. The best government is always the closest government. All of the taxes should be collected locally. The income tax, all of that's out there should be here locally and then sent on to what are the constitutional requirements of the province or the federal government. The bottom line is, if we're not collecting the taxes here and we send it out to these irresponsible individuals, it's sucking our communities dry, especially in rural Alberta, and we need to say no. And so we need a mandate from the people to say, you know what, we're going to collect all the taxes here and we'll pass them up the ladder rather than the other way around.
Paul Hinman is the leader of the Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition and the candidate for Taber-Warner. Thanks so much for your time today, Paul.
Thank you, Hal.
We are getting closer and closer to Alberta's election date. Here in Lethbridge, the lawn signs are up and door knockers are knocking and talking with residents to find out what their voter intention is. One Albertan that is close to the pulse of the voters' intention for Monday, May 29th is Vince Byfield. He joins me now from Edmonton. Vince, welcome back to Bridge City News. Great to have you on.
Great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure, Vince. Now, you are in Edmonton, and traditionally Edmonton has voted NDP in the provincial election, yet Conservative in the federal elections. Why do you think there is such a difference between the provincial and federal election outcomes?
Well, there's a few reasons for that. First of all, it hasn't always voted NDP. It has lately voted NDP, especially in the last two elections, 2019 and 2015. But starting in around the mid-'80s, that was when they had their big breakthrough. So there's a few things that have to happen for the NDP to do well in Edmonton. A big one is low voter turnout. The lower the turnout, the better the odds for the NDP.
Wow.
That's number one. And I would argue that in the last election and the one prior to that, the NDP have successfully persuaded a lot of Conservatives in Edmonton that it doesn't really matter, their vote doesn't really matter, and they just don't even come to the polls. And so I think that's why we, right now, as you know, but maybe the average person watching doesn't know, 19 of the 20 Edmonton seats are NDP seats. So we comprise pretty much 3/4 of the NDP caucus coming out of Edmonton. There's only one UCP candidate, and that would be Casey Madhu, the deputy premier. But that hasn't always been the case. In fact, Edmonton traditionally was at least half Conservative, and prior to that, Social Credit. And I have a strong suspicion that we're making our way back there. It's just a question of whether enough Edmontonians show up to vote and understand the gravity of the matter at hand.
So, I mean, this campaign is getting very fiery as of late between Danielle Smith and Rachel Notley. What do you think the voter turnout would look like in Edmonton?
My suspicion is it's going to be high, and I strongly suspect we're going to have very tight races. In the lead up to this, just for the UCP, all over the province, the candidate races, just to be the candidate for the UCP, we had at least 4 that were within 10 votes, and a couple of them were within 2 votes of winning. And it wouldn't surprise me at all in Edmonton if we have some that come down to a handful of votes.
So from those who you've been talking to, do you feel that voters think that this election is a lock for their favorite party or candidate?
Not at all. No. Even 338 is now adjusting a number of the seats for Edmonton from sure bets for the NDP to likely for the NDP. And just going around Edmonton looking at signage, I'm seeing a lot more UCP signage than in the past. But signage, can be misleading. When you're talking the major arteries, basically it's whoever can afford the most signs for that. What's much more telling is how many signs you see on people's lawns, because each one of those represents the permission of the tenant or owner of that property. I wouldn't say that it's the NDP are still very, very predominant, no question. But the UCPs, I'm in McClung on the west side of Edmonton, and I'd say it's about 50-50 right now. And I think that's in large part the case. Just going from door to door, when you're talking on behalf of the UCP, we typically see 39%, say 30 at over a third that are leaning for us, and then maybe a quarter that are leaning for the NDP. But we identify ourselves as UCP, so therefore it's very unlikely that there's going to be some NDP who just don't want to share their views with a UCP person. So it's going to be tight. I'm pretty sure it's going to be tight, except for some of the central constituencies. Like I really don't see Rachel having a challenge in Strathcona, and City Centre likewise. Those are probably going to still be strong NDP wins, but it's the ones around the Henday, both in and out, that are up for grabs at this point, I think.
So you touched on election signs and how they're not an accurate indication. Now let's talk about polling, because one thing we can count on during election time are the pollsters showing percentages and party lines among voters. But polls always have a margin of error. So based on what you've been hearing, do you think the polling in this election is accurate?
There's only one poll that matters, and that's going to be the one on May 29th. And I find that polling is a pretty loose science at best. A lot of it comes down to who you question, how you question, what you question, and typically you find that the UCP come out with numbers that, well, look at that, favoring the UCP, and the NDP do the same. So all I know is that it sells papers, it brings up views, but at the same time, I see, you'll notice now that they're showing more often that it's looking more and more like Danielle Smith's going to pull it off, and the UCP are going to win. And I've seen that pretty much since last fall. Quite frankly, I said at the time of the AGM, if the two big factions within the UCP can learn to get along and work together, they'll form government. And if they can't, then they won't. And they've gotten along for the most part. And so I think there's a very good chance that they're going to form government. The question that should be on the minds of Edmontonians is, do they want to have another 19 seats sitting in opposition, languishing in backbenches on the opposition, or do they want to have a seat at the table of government? Really, that's what it's going to come down to. And hopefully more and more of them will see the light, and Edmonton will go back to its traditional role of having at least half Conservatives and half others. So.
And why do you think we haven't seen the smaller fringe parties making any inroads in this election?
For what I said before, which was the two big factions traditionally, I'll say it this way, within the UCP, there are factions, and the two big ones, I think, in large part, centered around COVID. There were people who were against mandatory vaccination and masking and things like that, and there were people who were in favor of it. Mm-hmm. One argued that it was better for security. One argued that it was too high a price on freedom. Those two groups got together and made peace. And if they can make peace, then they can form government. And by doing that, that really muzzled a lot of the other parties, especially the Independence Party that was flaring up. And so now I don't. They're always going to be a factor, but I'd be surprised if they take more than 10% collectively of the vote. So.
And how big of a factor has the provincial NDP connection to the federal NDP and Liberal coalition been so far?
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk to NDP at the door, and for them, it's not a big factor. It is a big factor for Conservatives, and I'd say the average Albertan does not put Justin Trudeau at the top of their prayer list. Let's put it that way. But they should, but nonetheless, affiliating the NDP more and more with Justin Trudeau and the Liberals and federally has definitely helped persuade that swing voter. I'm still waiting. Traditionally, what the NDP does in the last few weeks of the election is throw out serious, quote unquote, dirt, and hopefully that shock value will have enough time for them. That's what they hope, is that it will have enough shock value to resonate with the average swing voter. I don't think it's going to work this time. And this latest salvo that they had is essentially a rehash of an old salvo. So tells me they're running out of ammo, which is probably a good thing for the UCP.
Yeah, because one thing that was raised at a Lethbridge Candidates Forum this week was the attack ads that most have seen during this election period. You've observed this as well, and so you feel that that the parties are running out of ammo. But do you feel that these type of ads have impacted voters' opinion of the candidates?
No. I think the average voter is wiser than in the past. You never can tell. I think that Danielle Smith and the UCP have done a really good job of hammering home what matters. It's the economy, right? Period. Period. Everything else. And as long as they're able to show that of the two parties, the one that has the much, much better track record in terms of maintaining and growing the economy, well, that would be the UCP. And I think that the average voter sees that, and it will play out certainly in the rural areas, and I think much more so in Calgary and in Edmonton than it has in past recent elections.
Interesting. And talking about Danielle Smith, and actually both leaders, how do you feel that Danielle Smith has been doing in this campaign? And then we'll talk about Rachel Notley afterwards.
I think she's done a superb job, quite frankly. Is she perfect? No. Who is, right? I think that Rachel has been giving many opportunities for the UCP to take her down a peg or two. This barring journalists from press scrums at the very and saying at that very same press scrum that you're welcoming all journalists. That's the UCP have been able to make much out of that, and that was of their own doing, right? So I don't unless she can pull a rabbit out of the hat, I don't think the NDP have this.
And so let's talk about Rachel Notley then. Do you think she's doing well? Or have you seen her message or tactics change?
The question is not so much is she doing well, is there an obvious person to replace Rachel? And I don't think that there is really. There are a few bright lights in the NDP scene, but I don't know if any of them will be able to command enough. Rachel has been around a long time. They've tied a lot of the NDP brand to the Rachel Notley brand, right? So they'd have to, I think that's really kind of tied them to her, whether they like it or not. So unless it's very possible that in fact, it's probable that there will be some sort of leadership contention after, but well, unless of course she wins. If she wins, then all is forgiven. But I don't think there's an obvious leadership contender waiting in the wings to take her out.
As we get closer to Election Day, what should voters be looking for?
Number one, getting out and voting. I think that this is probably the most important election that we have ever had in this province in terms of what's at stake. Right now, we have a federal government that is determined to dismantle our engine, our economic engine, and that's very serious. Number two is that it's going to be very tight in a lot of areas, not so much probably in the rural areas, but in the municipal areas. This could be an election where your vote, Irfan, is the vote in your riding, right? It could come down to a single vote. And if you're at home that you decide to, not show up at the polls that day, that's going to be quite a psychological load to carry for the next 4 years, knowing that had you shown up, you could have tilted the balance. So this is, I think, going to be one of the most exciting elections we've ever had.
Absolutely, Vince. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Always a pleasure to be on. You guys take care and enjoy the election and get out and vote, all of you.
Absolutely. That was Vince Byfield. He joined us from his office in Edmonton. I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.